I spent 25 years building that car collection. Every car had a story, a journey, a memory. 12 vintage European classics. All gone. Donated. While I was still in recovery from surgery. My gift to charity, my wife said. I thought you'd understand. I didn't. But 2 nights later, I watched the charity auction online. And that's when I saw her sitting in the front row, laughing beside a man I didn't recognize, watching him buy my most valuable cars for pennies on the dollar. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a donation. It was a heist. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm 52 years old, and until recently, I thought I had a solid life. Semi-retired. Lived just outside Dallas in a house I helped design. My garage held 12 of the rarest vintage cars you could find. A 72 Ferrari Dino, a 67 Maserati Ghibli SS, an original 911S, an Alfa Romeo Spider that I rebuilt with my own hands. I'd collected those cars over decades, bought, restored, polished, maintained. They were my pride, my escape, my legacy. Elaine, my wife of 17 years, never truly got it. She called them toys. Said I babied the garage more than I babied her. Still, she smiled for the holiday photos. Showed off the garage when her friends came over. At least, that's what I thought. A few weeks back, I went in for a minor appendectomy. Nothing major. But a post-op infection meant I had to stay an extra few days in the hospital. Elaine came to visit once. She brought flowers. Stayed 20 minutes. I remember her saying, "Rest up. You'll feel like yourself again soon." When I finally got home, the house was spotless. Too spotless. I walked through the kitchen, past the living room, straight to the garage door, and froze. The garage was empty. 12 vehicles. Gone. The floors were clean. Not a single oil mark. Not one fingerprint on the tool wall. Not even a scrap of microfiber left behind. It looked like no car had ever touched that space. I walked back into the kitchen. Elaine was standing at the counter, pouring tea like it was any other Tuesday. I didn't raise my voice. "Where are the cars?" She took a sip before answering. "Oh, you mean your collection?" I didn't say anything. "I donated them," she said, "to Drive Hope, that charity you used to talk about." My breath caught. "You did what?" She set the cup down. "Richard, they were just sitting there. You barely drove most of them. You gave away 12 cars, Elaine. Over $2.8 million worth without asking me. It's a tax write-off. We'll benefit from it. And legally, they're community property." I stepped back. This wasn't some impulsive decision. She'd planned this. Coordinated it. Probably while I was still in the hospital bed. And she hadn't told me. Because she knew exactly what she was doing. But that wasn't even the worst part. That came 2 days later, when I clicked on the charity auction replay link and saw her sitting beside a man in a navy blazer, a man raising his bitter paddle every time one of my cars came up. I paused the video, not because I was shocked, not even because I was angry, but because I was memorizing every second. Elaine didn't look like someone reluctantly participating in a charity event. She looked comfortable, relaxed, at ease beside the man bidding on my cars. The two of them leaned in close, whispering between bids. He had his arm resting casually behind her chair. She laughed at something he said, touched his knee. I rewound. Watched it again. And again. Same result every time. Elaine. With him. Smiling. Smug. He raised his paddle for the 67 Maserati Ghibli, my favorite. The crown jewel of the collection. Won it for less than half what it was worth. Then the Porsche 911S. The Alfa Romeo Spider. 3 cars I'd poured my soul into. Gone. In less than 10 minutes. I took a screenshot of his face. Uploaded it into a reverse image search. It didn't take long. His name was David Rourke. Owner of Rourke Automotive Holdings, a luxury dealer based out of Scottsdale, specialized in exporting rare cars to collectors in Dubai, Singapore, Seoul. Paid bottom dollar. sold for triple overseas. And buried in the results? A college photo. David, arm around Elaine. Younger, but no mistaking him. Elaine's ex-boyfriend. I sat back in my chair. This wasn't generosity. This was strategy. Elaine had donated the collection to a public auction knowing David would show up, bid low, and walk away with everything. Clean, legal, profitable. And all while I was lying in a hospital bed. She hadn't just wanted to get rid of my cars. She wanted to transfer them, without triggering any red flags, without me being able to claim theft. And she almost got away with it. But she made one mistake. She didn't expect me to check the auction footage. I picked up my phone, called Drive Hope, asked to speak with someone in acquisitions. The woman on the other end sounded cheerful, said they'd received the donation in my name, from the Bennett family. I asked if the donor had attended the auction. Yes, she said. Mrs. Bennett was wonderful. She brought her friend along. He helped manage some of the logistics for transporting the vehicles. I didn't correct her. I just thanked her. Hung up. Then I sat in the empty garage and stared at the wall. The same wall where I used to hang a metal sign-polished stainless steel. My motto: what we build with care can be lost in a moment of greed. The next morning I called Peter Langley, my attorney. We'd worked together for years in property deals, contracts, insurance disputes. He picked up on the second ring. Richard, he said, what's going on? I told him everything. The surgery, the donation, the auction, the video, David Rourke. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, we need to act fast. I sent him every document I had purchased, receipts, ownership logs, appraisal reports, maintenance invoices, titles. Everything was in my name, even the cars that weren't fully registered. I'd kept meticulous records, because I knew someday they'd matter. Peter filed an emergency injunction that same afternoon. We targeted the remaining vehicle Senni that hadn't shipped yet. He also sent a cease and desist to Drive Hope, instructing them not to transfer any more assets tied to the Bennett donation until ownership could be verified. And then he made a few calls to people who owed him favors. We located 3 of the 12 cars, still sitting in a bonded warehouse in Irving, waiting for international transport. I drove out there the next morning. And sure enough, under heavy wraps, crated and tagged, was the Dino, the Jaguar XKE, and the Mercedes 230 SL. All mine. Still untouched. Still waiting. I placed my hand gently on the Dino's hood, through the tarp. You're coming home, I whispered. Back in my truck, I looked at the warehouse gate in my rearview mirror. I wasn't just reclaiming cars. I was preparing for war. By the time I got back home, Elaine was waiting in the kitchen. She was dressed casually, holding her phone like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just tried to erase my life's work. I set my keys down. We need to talk. She didn't flinch, didn't act surprised. I figured you'd find out, she said. You're too obsessed with those cars to stay quiet. Obsessed? They were just sitting there, Richard, collecting dust. You haven't taken half of them out in months. I kept my voice even. You donated them to a charity auction, without asking me, while I was recovering in a hospital. Elaine shrugged, like I was being dramatic. I talked to the foundation. They were thrilled. And we'll get a generous deduction. You also talked to David Rourke. Her eyes narrowed, just a fraction. I saw the footage. You were at the auction, sitting next to him. So what? She snapped. He's an old friend. He helped coordinate the sale. That's all. I stepped closer. He bought the Maserati, the Porsche, the Alfa Romeo, all for undervalue. Coincidence. You listed the cars as a joint marital donation. That's fraud, Elaine. Those vehicles were in my name. I've got paperwork to prove it. She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. Technically, we're in a community property state. That means I had the right, not without consent, not to coordinate resale with your ex-boyfriend. I didn't coordinate anything, she said, but the tremor in her voice was growing. I held up my phone and tapped the screen. The paused image from the auction livestream filled the display. Elaine, smiling, David's arm behind her. "You forgot one thing," I said quietly. "The internet never forgets." She didn't say anything, so I kept going. "Drive Hope believes you made a good faith donation. They don't know David's your ex. They don't know he was buying the collection to ship overseas for profit. They don't know about the wire transfers you made to that Nevada LLC last week." Her face froze. "You've been watching my accounts?" "I'm watching mine. And when 6 figures vanish into a shell company that traces back to a Scottsdale dealership? Yeah, I start paying attention." Elaine's voice dropped, cold, defensive. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You always overreact. I was trying to help you move on." "From what?" "From clinging to a fantasy life. From pouring your energy into metal and chrome instead of this marriage." I nodded slowly. "You're right. I did pour myself into those cars." Then I turned, walked to the garage door, and opened it. We both stared into the space. Empty. Clean. Quiet. "You took all of it, Elaine. Without asking. Without warning. And you thought I'd just accept it?" She hesitated. "I thought you'd understand eventually." I looked at her. "No. What you thought was that I wouldn't fight back." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, going through digital folders, pulling old email chains, scanning physical documents, matching receipts with VINs. Every detail, every transaction, labeled, cross-referenced, backed up 3 times. By midnight, I had everything I needed. At 3 a.m., I got a text from Peter. "Warehouse freeze order approved. 3 vehicles secured. Investigating David Rourke's export trail." I replied, "Good. Next step, follow the money." And just before sunrise, I opened the online portal for the Nevada Business Registry, typed in the shell company name linked to the transfers. The listed manager? Elaine M. Bennett. And just like that, she went from a bad spouse to a criminal. And I knew exactly how to deal with that. 2 days later, I walked into Peter's office with a flash drive in my jacket pocket and fire in my chest. He was already on a call when I arrived, but the moment he saw my face, he hung up without finishing the sentence. "You found something." I dropped the flash drive on his desk. "David's company, the Nevada LLC, traces back to Elaine. She used it to route auction proceeds through a fake consultancy agreement." Peter plugged in the drive, brows furrowing as he scanned the folders. "Purchase receipts, internal transfers. Richard, this isn't just sketchy. This is prosecutable." She signed the contract as a logistics consultant for Rourke Automotive. 10% commission on sales. "She got paid," I said, "to donate my collection." Peter leaned back. "She's cooked. David, too. Especially if Drive Hope testifies they didn't know the connection." "They didn't," I confirmed. "I called their compliance officer anonymously. She thought Elaine was a grieving wife trying to honor my legacy." Peter let out a breath. "Okay, then we've got something." He started listing next steps: freeze accounts, subpoena records, build a fraud case, but I raised a hand. "I'm not just after a win in court. What do you want?" "I want leverage. Not to destroy her, to control her. She thinks she's clever." Peter stared at me a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's be 10 steps ahead." That evening, Elaine came home from a yoga class. New clothes. Expensive bag. Like nothing was unraveling beneath her feet. I waited until she poured herself a glass of wine. Then I slid the Nevada business registration across the table. She read the name, froze, then looked up. "You're digging through my things now?" "No," I said. "I'm exposing them." Her jaw clenched. "Okay, fine, yes. I earned a commission. For managing the logistics of the donation, that's legal." "It was a scheme," I replied. "The cars weren't yours, the sale wasn't clean, and the paperwork doesn't lie." She tried to smile. "You have no proof." I tapped the table twice. "Drive Hope didn't know David was your ex, didn't know he was a buyer, didn't know about your LLC. That's 3 counts of concealed conflict and donation misrepresentation. Not to mention breach of fiduciary duty if we go through divorce proceedings." She stared at me, eyes cold now. "So what do you want?" I leaned forward. "3 things. 1, you sign over ownership of the 3 remaining cars, effective immediately. 2, you drop all claims to our estate. Everything. The house, the accounts, the investments. And 3, I held her gaze. You sign a sworn affidavit confirming David's involvement. Full timeline, no omissions." She laughed, bitter. "You think I'll just hand over everything?" "I think," I said calmly, "you know what happens if I send this folder to the IRS, Drive Hope's legal team, and the state attorney general." Her laugh died in her throat. "You recorded me, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the papers. She didn't say another word. She knew she'd lost. 2 days later, we met at Peter's office. She signed every page without raising her voice once. No threats, no tears. Just a dead-eyed resignation of someone who bet wrong. When she left the building, Peter turned to me. "She's going to hate you forever, you know." "Good," I said. "It'll keep her from coming back." That night, I pulled the covers off the Dino in the garage. Ran my fingers along the curve of the hood. She was back. And so was I. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the bonded warehouse. The cars were ready for release. I signed the documents in person title reassignments, ownership verification, export hold removal. Everything was in my name now, undisputed. The Dino, the Jaguar XKE, the Mercedes 230 SL. All 3 rolled out of the storage bay in silence, their engines untouched, still wearing the same wax I'd applied months ago. When the garage door at my house opened again and the first car slid inside, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not relief, not joy. Something steadier. Balance. By the end of the day, the 3 cars were parked exactly where they belonged. Bay 3, 4, and 6. I left Bay 5 open for the Ghibli. The one David stole. But I wasn't done yet. Peter called that evening. "I got a response from Rourke's legal team," he said. "They're stonewalling, pretending they didn't know Elaine's involvement. Do they have a copy of her affidavit?" "They will by morning." I nodded. "Let's see how fast they change their tune." The next day, Peter filed a complaint with the Texas Attorney General's office alleging coordinated asset misappropriation through charitable misrepresentation and fraudulent resale. We attached Elaine's affidavit, the wire transfers, screenshots from the auction live stream, and the Nevada LLC filing. 2 days after that, Drive Hope's general counsel reached out. They were livid. They'd launched an internal audit, suspended their auction coordinator, and publicly distanced themselves from Elaine and Rourke Automotive. By the end of the week, the foundation had issued a press release. Drive Hope unknowingly facilitated the resale of donor assets under false pretenses. We are cooperating fully with authorities. The fallout was immediate. David Rourke's dealership in Scottsdale was put under internal review. His name disappeared from the homepage. Rumors spread through the collector forums. Some of his high-net clients backed away. Whispers turned into threads. Threads into headlines. By week 2, Rourke Automotive Holdings had locked down their Instagram, shut down comments, and delayed 3 upcoming export shipments. One of them contained the 1967 Maserati Ghibli SS. Peter called. "They're nervous." I smiled. "Good. They should be. I didn't want money. I wanted that car. The one that started it all." So I went to work. I called a friend of mine, Jason Hillen, auto journalist based in Phoenix. He owed me a favor from a shoot I'd done years back for his magazine. "Tell me everything you know about David Rourke," I said. Jason chuckled. "Where do I start?" Within 24 hours, I had editorial articles, lawsuits, a couple of settled disputes over vehicle condition misrepresentation. Nothing criminal. But the kind of noise collectors hate: sloppy transactions, shady paperwork, shipping inconsistencies. Then Jason sent me something unexpected. A shipping manifest from a leaked customs report. One of the vehicles listed under David's next export batch was the Ghibli. Destination: Dubai. Departure: 2 weeks out. I called Peter. "We've got a location." He filed an emergency motion requesting a block on the vehicle's export based on contested ownership and fraudulent transfer. And then I waited. For 5 days, I heard nothing. Then, just after 10 p.m. on a Friday night, my phone buzzed. "Blocked number." I answered. "You win," a voice said. Low, tight, David Rourke. "You want the Ghibli?" he said. "Fine, it's yours. But you leave my name out of the fraud filings, and you don't go to the press." I didn't say anything. "I'll have it delivered to the bonded warehouse in Irving," he continued. "Clean title. We'll sign it over. You get your toy. I keep my business." I waited a beat, then said, "Agreed." The car arrived 2 days later. Wrapped, crated, still untouched. I watched as they lowered it from the trailer and rolled it slowly into the empty Bay 5. When the dust settled and the engine stopped humming, I stood there, just me and the Ghibli, in the same garage that had once been stripped bare. Now full again, not just of cars, but of proof that you can take from a man, lie to him, steal from him, betray him. But if he's patient, if he knows what he's worth, he'll get it all back. 6 months passed. The garage was whole again. 12 cars, 12 stories, all back where they belonged. But I was different. Something in me had shifted. I'd spent half my life collecting these machines, chasing perfection in steel and chrome. Now I understood what they really were. Not just cars. They were memory, legacy, proof that I'd built something worth protecting. Elaine was long gone. We finalized the divorce in under 60 days. No assets, no court battles, no apology. She moved out quietly and disappeared from my life like a closing door. Peter called one afternoon to tell me that the IRS had opened a formal inquiry into her business filings. Something about undeclared consulting income. I didn't ask for updates after that. I didn't need to know. David Rourke's empire unraveled slower, but just as surely. The auction scandal became a cautionary tale on every collector forum. Drive Hope cut all ties publicly. Then came the trade restrictions. 3 international shipping lanes suspended his vehicle exports. Within months, his inventory shrank. His clients thinned out. Last I heard, he was selling off his Scottsdale showroom to stay afloat. I never said his name out loud again. Didn't need to. The community handled it for me. Word travels fast in a world built on reputation. And his was gone. One crisp morning in late October, I stood in my garage and looked at the Dino. The sun was filtering through the open bay doors, catching the curve of the fender just right. Beside it sat the Ghibli, freshly detailed, the car that triggered it all. My hands were steady on the wheel as I pulled her out and took her down the hill into the valley roads. No destination, just the sound of the engine, the wind in my ears, and a feeling I hadn't touched in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from winning. The kind that comes from enduring. That night I poured a drink and walked the garage floor in my socks, touching each car in turn. Remembering where I found them, how long it took to restore, the long nights, the broken parts, the moments where I almost gave up. They all came back. And so did I. The next morning, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Caroline. She ran a local automotive academy vocational training for high school kids who didn't want a desk job. I told her I had space, tools, knowledge, and time. 2 weeks later, the garage had visitors. 3 boys, 2 girls, all between 16 and 19. They stood in awe, wide-eyed, staring at the Ferrari, the Jaguar, the Porsche like they'd stepped into a dream. "This is where you work?" one asked. I nodded. "This is where I live." Every Saturday after that, they came by. We rotated tires, tuned carburetors, cleaned fuel lines. I showed them how to listen to a machine, how to treat it like something alive. And they listened. More than I expected. One of them, Luis, stayed late every week. Quiet, focused. One afternoon, he said, "I didn't think guys like you would teach people like us." I turned to him. "Luis, I was you. I just had more time to figure it out. He nodded, then asked if he could help detail the Ghibli. I handed him the keys. He smiled like I'd given him the world. And maybe I had, because that was the moment I knew. The collection was never really about the cars. It was about building something worth passing on. A year later, I stood in the middle of the garage, now renamed the Bennett Legacy Workshop. The floors gleamed. The walls bore photo snapshots of restorations, before and afters, portraits of the students who came through on weekends. The same 12 cars sat in their places, but now they had fingerprints on them, greasy ones, left by teenagers learning how to rebuild a carburetor or torque a head gasket without stripping the bolts. I didn't mind. Those prints meant something. They meant the work was alive. That evening, we held a small open house for local schools and trade instructors. Caroline gave a short speech. Luis demoed a valve timing adjustment on the Dino for a group of kids and their parents. And then, they turned to me. I walked up to the front of the garage, cleared my throat, and rested my hand on the hood of the Ghibli. "This car was stolen," I said, "not with bolt cutters or crowbars, but with a lie." I let the words hang. Someone I trusted tried to erase what I'd built, quietly, legally, thoughtfully. A few heads nodded. "But I got it back," I said, my voice low. Not because I shouted louder, but because I knew what I had, and I refused to let anyone define its value for me. I looked out across the crowd. To anyone out there who's ever been told they don't belong, that their passion is worthless, or their work is just a hobby, I'm here to tell you that you're not wrong. They are. This place exists because I lost everything, and decided I'd rather rebuild it by hand than ever let someone else decide what it was worth. A beat. And if you're ever in that same place standing in the middle of something broken, remember this. I turned slightly, looking at the row of cars behind me. Not everything lost stays lost. Some things come back stronger, louder, and exactly where they belong. They clapped. Some quietly, some with more force than I expected. Louise came up after and said, "You ever think you'd end up teaching?" I shook my head. "No, but I think this was the plan all along. I just didn't know it." That night, I stood in the garage after everyone left, one hand on the Ferrari's fender, the other holding a cold glass of bourbon. The silence was full, not empty like before. Full of work, of memory, of peace. Elaine never reached out again. Her name was a footnote now, a shadow behind me. David Rourke's company dissolved by the end of the fiscal year. A quiet, unceremonious closure posted online. No one said goodbye. The collector world forgot him. They remembered me. I started getting invited to classic car panels, restorers' conferences, even a few magazine covers. Not because I chased the spotlight, but because the story got around. The guy who got it all stolen and took it all back. People like that tend to leave a mark. And when young mechanics ask me what really happened, I just tell them, I lost everything. Then I went home, opened the garage, and started turning wrenches. Because revenge doesn't always need a fire. Sometimes it just needs patience. And that's how I learned that living well isn't just the best revenge. It's the one that lasts. What did you think of this story? Would you have handled it the same way as Richard? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Smash that like. Subscribe to Revenge with Max for more true stories of betrayal, justice, and quiet comebacks every single day. And share this with someone who knows exactly what it means to fight for what's theirs.